Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar today on Exponential HR. We're very excited about this since we launched Exponential HR, we've had a very positive response from clients across industries and geographies about the way we're challenging the traditional ways of thinking about how to operate the HR function. And what we're really trying to do with this with Exponential HR is to connect the dots on different trends that are hot topics today, really in terms of how these are providing new opportunities for HR. So just a public service announcement before we get going, which is that we will be talking, Christian and I, for about 30 minutes, and we'll have some questions at the end. But if you have any questions as we're going through, please feel free to just enter those into the question field, and we'll try and take those as we're progressing. My name is Justin Noah. I'm a senior manager in human capital in the HR transformation team based here in Copenhagen. And I'm joined today by Christian, yeah?
Yeah, and my name is Christian Johansson. I'm a director with HRT alongside Jazz. I'll tell the guys a little bit more about myself. I've got about a year and a bit with Deloitte, but I have about 10 or 15 years in implementing talent management software and HCM software. I recently joined Deloitte from Deloitte Australia, so I've got a bit of experience from down under as well.
Super. Thanks, Christian. So, for those of you familiar with our sort of reports and our points of view, you will know that we've been discussing a number of key workforce and technology disruptions to organizations in the last few years. And more recently, we've even begun to redefine the nature of the enterprise itself as the social enterprise, which is very much the sort of the key theme in our human capital trends reports over the last 2 or 3 years. Exponential HR is a continuation of this narrative, and the implications of these disruptions can be seen at 3 levels, as you can see on the slide here. At an enterprise level, there's exponential growth in data being generated. We're seeing sort of increasingly short company lifespans on key stock indices, at least when viewed historically. And we're also seeing significant social forces at play. All of this means that organizations worldwide are rapidly adapting in order to withstand disruption. And they're also appreciating a growing need to benefit the workforce and society, and not just shareholders. So that's really what's happening with the future of the enterprise. At a workforce level today, again, there are a number of disruptions taking place. We have up to 5 worker generations in the workplace at once, meaning that there's a multiplicity of workforce, but there's also a generational shift towards millennials taking place, as well as a growth in the alternative workforce in contingent workers and self-employed workers. So from a workforce perspective, this means that organizations need to be able to effectively access and integrate a full spectrum workforce and create a workforce experience that creates a deeper meaning. Now, of course, creating that deeper meaning is a theme in the Human Capital Trends Report, but beyond that, that workforce experience also needs to drive productivity and growth towards work outcomes. And finally, in terms of how work gets done, there is technology that's enhancing our own personal lives, and there's an imperative now for organizations to really leverage these technologies to reimagine work, create greater agility, and make things simpler for a better work experience, and to do so in a way that sort of doesn't forget the human worker below all of the technology, which is the central premise of this year's Human Capital Trends Report. In the context of the pandemic and COVID-19, feedback from our clients has been that the acceleration towards this journey has really pushed forward as a result of the pandemic. So indeed, the future is now. So what does this mean for HR? Well, these futures present a huge opportunity for HR because unlike any other function inside of an enterprise, HR is pretty much at the center of these disruptive forces. And HR has an opportunity and really must take the lead. This is a point we've made in this year's Trends Report in the chapter called A Memo to HR. And in the report, we really talk about the fact that HR needs to expand its role and extend its influence. So the fact is that HR needs to sort of move away from being a supporter function to a leader function to really sort of navigate these three futures which are happening simultaneously. So the implications for HR are significant. In terms of the future of the enterprise, HR can lead to help the workforce to become more agile, to extend the ecosystem into partnership models, for example. In terms of how work gets done, HR can sort of really reimagine how work gets done through a digital approach. And this is also about sort of shifting mindsets and ways of working. An interesting case I'd like to share with you about Deloitte is we have a partnership with an organization called Girls That Code in the US. And that's sort of an example of how HR is leading Deloitte in terms of extending into the ecosystem, touching on the future of the enterprise, but also in terms of the future of workforce, creating a more inclusive and alternative or non-traditional talent pool to make them available. Perhaps one of the biggest things that we see HR having the opportunity to do inside of the future of workforce is to change the language. So this is important because we have a workforce that is really about bringing together diverse workers. So it's not really anymore about attracting people to join the organization or developing and retaining them. It's really about bringing in that talent from different places. It's about accessing the talent. It's about curating experiences to help bring their knowledge in to help address the ever-changing shift in skill sets. And it's about engaging that workforce from wherever they come, orchestrating that experience in a way that drives teaming and productivity and enables continuous learning. So Exponential HR is anchored in a concept that we call work outcomes. And the concept is to say that, for HR to redesign processes or re-engineer technologies for efficiency and effectiveness, or other similar initiatives that we are so familiar with when it comes to improving HR operating models. Today, those sorts of initiatives really are they're a given. They're a basic expectation today. In the future, there's a demand on HR to sort of lead the enterprise internally and in the marketplace in order to drive work outcomes. Now, these work outcomes include things like spearheading the workforce strategy that you can see on the slide there, fostering team collaboration, sort of curating the human experience, and of course, accessing talent. Now, all of these work outcomes are in service of achieving a bigger set of outcomes for the enterprise that you can see on the left there, like innovating faster, beating the competition, improving productivity, unlocking value. So these are big business objectives, and HR has the opportunity, in fact, we believe it's a need, to really drive these new work outcomes that push the boundaries for the enterprise itself. So I think we have a question that's come in. So let's take a look at it. So there's a question: will we share the slides after the workshop? Absolutely. Do we have any Deloitte or Burson white papers related to this topic which we could share? Yes, we do. We'll provide those links to you in the email you receive after the webinar. So no problems at all. So moving back to the presentation, and thank you for the questions. Please do keep those in. Let's step back a moment and take a look at the progress of HR over the years. You'll recognize here the progression from the far left of the screen, the Dave Ulrich model, very famous. This came out in the late 1990s, so it's been around for a good while. In the middle there, under the advanced circle, you will see the high impact HR operating model. This is something that Deloitte released 5 years ago. And it really helped to sort of bring the thinking forward on HR operating models into a more sort of contemporary setting. So we really focused on a different kind of customer-centered approach to HR. And this was an approach that resonated with many of our clients, and I'm sure it's something that you all on the webinar today are familiar with. But as I've been explaining, there's something new coming in, and to achieve the outcomes and indeed for HR to deal with the implications of those requirements, HR now needs to move into a world that is exponential. And being exponential does include some of the traditional elements of HR like COEs, HR operations and business HR. But it also means driving a different way of collaborating within HR and across into the organization and the enterprise. It means working with human experience focus in mind and really being equipped to deliver inside a digital age. We see many of our clients are transitioning between advanced and exponential, but some are also between traditional and advanced. And this is about continuing the evolution.
There's a question.
Is there a question? No, I think we can move on.
Yeah.
Okay, so exponential HR, to move beyond incremental improvements and really becoming exponential, HR needs to reimagine itself as being adaptable. It sort of needs to imagine itself as really being an agile organization. It has to take an architecting role for the organization in terms of human experience, and it needs to fully embrace technology to augment the human capabilities within the organization to deliver exponential HR. So that's the scene setting, and I'm now going to hand over to Christian, who's going to double click on each of these A's for you.
Thanks, Jazz. So yes, so we're going to spend a little time diving into these 4 A's, these 4, let's call them categories of characteristics that we believe sit at the core of being exponential. So first off, and as I go through this, by the way, I'll try and make it real by including some examples of how organizations that we work with have actually tried to approach these characteristics and kind of getting into that mindset as we go along. So first off, we'll talk about being adaptable. And for me, the key word in adaptability is about being resilient to change. A lot of organizations in the traditional sense are optimized, are designed to cope with a certain challenge or deliver a certain product or perform a certain task. However, in a reality where the parameters for those problems or the nature of those challenges change on a weekly basis, the starting point for that design quickly becomes suboptimal. So how do you become more resilient to those changes and being able to cope with these new parameters and these new combinations of problems that the organization is faced with? So we'll look at how you can do that, so become resilient to change on a number of layers. So we'll go from the macro to the micro, the ecosystem to the individual, and talk about each of them and how being adaptable can affect each of those levels. So first of all, the ecosystem is about the market that you're in, the workforce that you're serving, the customers that your organization is serving, that macro level. And being adaptable on that level is about being sensitive to the changes in demands that you see. So if your organization is sort of stuck in delivering a certain range of products that you believe that's all that's ever going to be required, that's when being sensitive to changes in those requirements and being able to pivot and deliver to those new demands becomes essential for being adaptable on an ecosystem level. On the organizational level, it's about getting away from the traditional box and stick hierarchical structure of an organization and adapting or taking on a more networked model where any sort of left field challenge or problem that comes in can be absorbed and be met because you have a more flexible structure where the organization can mold itself and can adapt to those changing requirements and demands. On a team level, we're talking about high-performing teams and how the team structure can be set up with a skill set profile that is resilient to change and can cope more easily with change coming in, so that the teams aren't stuck in a specific way of resolving issues or delivering product, but is able to pivot and to change on a team level as well. Looking further down for your managers and your individuals, on a manager level, it's about being accepting of creativity, allowing creativity in your team, encouraging self running, allowing your employees to come up with ideas, to be open to failure as well. So not being strict on, we need to deliver X and that's all we'll ever do, but allowing that openness and flexibility in your team. Finally, on an individual level, it's about making sure that your staff members are resilient to change. So designing leadership programs, designing talent programs and development programs that focus on change and the ability to absorb change in your daily life. So that's being adaptable. Again, change is the highlight. And I promised I would try and tie this back to a real life example. So we have we work with a client in the Netherlands, a very well-known consumer product firm. And what they've done to try and approach this is to create what they call a flex pool. So they're still a traditional organization in the traditional sense, but in order to be able to cope with change and to adapt, they've approached that characteristic by creating this pool of people with a certain skill set. So you have a wide range of skills, experiences, all in this pool of resources that you can loan out to deal with specific problems. So, and this is something that I know that they had a lot of success with, and it's become a very popular position to have, to be part of this flex pool. So that's one example of kind of an interim way of approaching adaptability by having these flex pools in your organization. So I'll move on to Agile. So looking at Agile, the key word there for me is experimentation, iteration, and speed. So a lot of the challenges that HR are faced with these days is to deliver fast, to deliver solutions to unique problems that they may never have had to deal with before, and do so quickly. So in order to do that, an agile approach needs to be adopted, where there's a less focus on getting it perfect in the first try, where you allow for iterations, trying something out, see what happens, get feedback, change course if anything isn't working perfectly, tweak that, release again, rinse and repeat essentially. So getting that agile mindset into problem solving, instead of spending too much time trying to get it absolutely right before you release a solution or a program or a policy, try and get as close to what you believe is required, see what happens, take the feedback, rework, and so on. So that's essentially the core of agility and being agile. Delivering solutions quickly is the main thing there. We're looking at 5 different areas where you could look at agility. So people, products, processes, org structures, and technology. I'm not going to spend too much time on these, but essentially, for the people aspect, it's about encouraging the notion of agile, getting people out of the idea that everything has to be perfect the first time, and get them to understand that the concepts of agile the vocabulary and get them into that frame of mind when they work. For products as well, so the products that HR deliver, so things like performance reviews, bonus processes, and so on. Again, employ the idea of product management, where you have a constant iteration, constant improvement of these products, so that they avoid becoming stale and disassociated from the mindset of the organization. Continuous improvement is the key word there for products. Processes as well. So, and this is close to my heart as a systems implementer. HR processes such as the hire process or transferring an employee from one job to another needs to be relatable to an agile worker. It needs to be quick. It needs to be efficient, which is key to make these processes relatable to the employees that actually have to go through them. Org structures as well. So we've talked about this before on the adaptable side of things. Again, a network structure for your organizations to allow for that agility and that speed to occur. Finally, technology. In order to have an agile working style, you need the technology to underpin that. So looking at how you can introduce technology that allows for teams to coalesce across regions and across time zones and create that collaborative sense of working in an agile setting. Again, in terms of trying to make this real, we work with an American airline, and much like the previous example, they also decided to create this SWAT team essentially, but with a different focus. The focus of this team was to be fast to action. That was the name of the group. So essentially consisting of a group of people who act almost like consultants. So when a given project or a challenge seems to be stuck and the solution isn't forthcoming, there isn't that drive and progress that the organization is looking for, these people can come in and try and figure out how to get things moving quickly. Apply agile methodologies to speed things up and get things underway. So that's an example for agile. Moving on to architecting. So architecting is really about being holistic in your approach. So when you think about solving a problem or introducing a change, think of the end-to-end perspective beyond HR. So this is where design thinking and workforce experience comes into play. So for instance, what I often think about in this context is things like the onboarding experience. So if you've ever dealt with a systems implementation or come in contact with the process involved in getting a new employee into the organization, this is where you normally will have to draw on almost the entire plethora of organizational services to get that employee up and running. So it has to do with what is the experience of that employee as they go through those steps. It's not purely HR. It often involves numerous other elements, anything from IT to services to whatever it might be, and that process needs to be seamless and a great experience for the new employee. So when you're thinking processes, think like an architect. Think, you need to build the entire house. You're not just building a room in the house, you're building the entire thing. So being more holistic in your approach, be end to end essentially. That's the architecting view. Finally, we'll look at the augmented perspective. So augmentation is really about embracing the technologies that are emerging these days. So we're talking about machine learning, we're talking about AI, digital assistants, data analysis, advanced data analysis. All these tools have become available now. Augmentation is about embracing that, inviting the digital assistants into your work life and allow them to become part of your team, essentially, delivering a service to your end users. So we have three groupings here. We've got insights, which is all about data. So about analyzing data to drive predictability, to see trends, to identify outliers, and so on. And this is already a big business, essentially, on its own, but also as part of some of the suites that we deliver, HCM core tools. You have cognitive tools and automation. Automate tasks, things that are repetitive, predictable, easy to do. Have a robot do it instead of employees. Shift the human aspect away from those types of tasks and put the robots to work, essentially. Finally, we have engagement, which is about how, which is part of the workforce experience as well. So how does the your end user interact with you as an HR organization? So if I can go on a web page and talk to a digital assistant who will tell me how many days I've got left on my holiday balance, or answer any other types of questions, my experience as an end user is great. I get the job done, and no real person has been involved in that process. All right, I need to move on. We have a couple more slides just talking about what we call the super jobs. So there's a number of roles that are foundational that aren't going to go away. They're still going to be around, as Jaz mentioned earlier on, and we see those on the left-hand side there of the screen. So leadership, business advisors, shared services, those things will remain. But we've identified a number of emerging roles that fit into these four categories of characteristics that will become central to the Exponential HR department. So things like workforce experience architect, solution architect, and if you think about some of the four A's that I've explained, you can probably see how these fit in already. So things like product manager or sprint lead, that's agile, right? Those are agile concepts. Those are roles that you need to run an agile business. Augmented HR specialist, this deals with some of the complexities around things like data analysis or digital assistants, that sort of thing, chatbots. Someone who's a specialist in that area, which is a new role as well. So these are some of the emerging roles that we see will become required to underpin an exponential HR department. Moving on to the final slide that I'll take you through. Emerging HR capabilities. So we have identified the top 10 capabilities that we believe will be in demand in an exponential HR setting. Some of these, you could tie these back to some of the roles that we just went through, and in some ways, you can an organization moving into to exponential HR wouldn't necessarily, look at all of these all at once, but you can pick and choose the ones that feel most relevant to you and are easiest to get into as a starting point. But again, we have integrators, being digitally literate, innovative thinker, entrepreneur, action-oriented, and so on. These are all capabilities that we believe are key, essentially, to be able to get into the world of exponential HR. Anything you want to add to that, Jaz?
No, I mean, I guess as we transition to questions, Christian.
Yeah.
Thank you for that run through. That's really clarified many things for me in my own mind. I had a question, and please will you all sort of type in your questions that you may have. Being adaptable, being agile, there is this kind of a similarity there. So in your mind, if you were to sort of clarify the difference between those two, what would you say?
No, you're right. They do seem interchangeable at certain levels, but I think the key thing to me about being adaptable is this thing about being able to deal with change, to absorb change, to take change in your stride and move on. Whereas being agile is more about pace. It's about the speed at which you are able to churn out a solution to a problem.
Okay.
So I think that's for me anyway where the main difference lies between those two perspectives.
Super. Thank you very much. So we have some questions. So let's look at the questions that have come in. So which do you think is most important? I guess perhaps you're referring to the A's there. So if you had
I would
to,
assume so, yeah.
if you had to sort of pick one of the A's as being sort of critical, or let's say number one in the order, Christian, which would you go for?
I do think adaptable is one of the areas where I think that organization would have. I think it'd be one of the easiest to implement, but it would also be one where you could see a lot of benefits. Because we come across organizations all the time that are struggling, where their operating model or the way that they perceive the world has changed radically, and they're wondering, how do we address that? How do we reorganize to address this change? The ideal of an adaptable organization is to be able to deal with those changes without having to really change too much in the way that you're organized. To have resilience to change built into the fabric of the organization. I think that's a very intriguing idea and something that I would look into.
Great answer. Super relevant as well, given
Absolutely.
the current circumstances. I have a favorite too, which I will talk about, which is architecting. I know that you were a little bit skeptical about
sure.
architecting, but that speaks to me because I really sort of see how that requires HR to put itself into a different role, to really sort of extend itself out into the enterprise, and to move from being a kind of a supporter function to really being more of a leader function, a driver function. Having that end-to-end perspective in mind and delivering that kind of the worker experience, which resonates with an alternative workforce, but also which drives the key work outcomes that is required in the world of Exponential. So we have another question here. How do you work with Exponential HR best in a public organization? Good question. I guess what could be implied there, Christian, I'm giving myself the role of asking you all of the questions now, so you have to answer all of the questions.
Well,
okay?
I think actually one real life example I missed out on the augmented perspective is one that comes from Australia, where I spent some time. The Australian Defence Force actually did some work on the augmented side of Exponential HR, where they implemented a number of chatbots and digital assistants to help out their end users, and the effects that they had were tremendous. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was something like a 23% increase in productivity, and 20 odd FTE that they were able to redirect to other jobs after the implementation of these digital assistants. I'm not saying that is a given for any public organization, but I'm sure that any organization in general will have a number of tasks and questions that come in from their end users that can be handed to digital assistants and chatbots, thereby freeing up a lot of capacity in HR.
Super, thank you, Christian. And I guess from my perspective, if I were to add something to the answer, we are clearly in the digital age now. We're not going to move backwards, and I think all industries are really grappling with how do they become really digital at their core. And to a certain extent, I think HR need to be a part of that journey, even within a public organization. The language, could be adjusted and adapted, but to a certain extent, it is a reality. So that just a perspective. Any other questions that you may have? Feel free. No more questions? Okay, well, I think I think maybe we can wrap then. Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Really appreciate your inputs too. Thanks to you, Christian. We will send out an email to you all, a link to a survey to complete, as well as with the additional information associated with Exponential HR. Thank you.
Thank you very much.